gonna. I feel like we already did a podcast. We should have started recording. Yeah, a while ago, huh? Dealing with. Well, we dealt with a little bit of everything prior to turning the recording on, but dealing with accountability was the last one. And I think where that's going to dovetail with today's conversation is going to be, and I wrote it down right before I started recording, is humility. Dealing with me.
Yeah.
I guarantee the biggest problem in every person's relationship, guaranteed, I would say this is without exception, the biggest problem in every person's relationship is me.
You?
Is the me in the relationship. The biggest problem in every single one of my relationships is me.
Yeah.
And it's and so what I want to talk about today is conflict resolution. And this could take a bunch of different turns, but I think it's relevant to the conversation we just had, which was just being accountable and kind of understanding that we need each other. We at least need a good mirror in our lives. A lot of times those mirrors in our lives are each other, are your spouse, your kids, your friends, your church. That's the mirror that helps us see our own humanity. And so, all that said, so conflict resolution. And when I say that, that's something that every single person, well, I'd say every single person on the face of the earth has to deal with conflict, right?
For sure.
How well we resolve it is the question. And so I thought maybe we talk about what we've found to be effective ways of dealing with conflict and resolving things, and even maybe just our own struggles, because everybody is on a different trajectory when it comes to dealing with. And here's the truth: a lot of people deal with conflict resolution in a professional setting or other types of settings, and are terrible at it in their own family or marriage. So, any thoughts before go ahead.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think learning good conflict management skills, is important. I would even push it back to a really early conversation that we had, and having kids. Growing up with other children around, you're learning conflict resolution skills. I mean, I'm not talking about adults. I'm talking about the kids as they grow up,
right,
in a family or with family close by. There's this idea that they've got to learn how to interact and how to maybe at times press for what they want or be able to yield. So everybody, there's conflict from the get-go almost.
Yeah.
It's learning how to effectively deal with it. And I think what you said is key. You can't always, someone said in a counseling situation one time, the only thing that you can change in this situation is from the nose back.
Right.
You can't change anything out here,
Yep.
but you can change from here back.
So put the spouse behind you. That's what you're saying.
Right.
I talked to a guy yesterday in the shop, and you could tell he was an accomplished person. The thing he was selling to me was a very high-end watch, and you could tell it's somebody who had had a very successul career and had lived in many different countries, right? And then he told me that he had been married 3 times, or was married, he was with his third wife. And I was like, oh, okay, interesting. And he said his first wife was Filipino, his second wife was, his first wife was Peruvian, the second wife was Filipino, and his third wife is Russian.
Wow.
And I know this guy, he's been all over the place. It's interesting. I said to him after he was kind of laying out where all he's been and all these things, I said, what would you do differently? And he looked at me and said, that's an interesting question. I don't think I've ever really thought of that, or no one's ever asked me that. And I thought, wow, how often is that the case? And one of the things he said was, and we'll talk about, first, I'd like to kind of just address, for me anyway, and for a lot of people, the biggest source of conflict can be our relationships with our spouses. And so, because he said, My second wife, he said, he had married this person, they'd gotten divorced. And his second wife, he said, everything was perfect for they dated for, I think he said a couple of years. And he said it was great until the day they got married. And I thought, that's kind of strange. First of all, you married the wrong person if that was the case. But secondly, I thought, there is a little bit of that once the shine, how it is with a car. Once the shine wears off, it's like, oh, and then you see, oh, wow, that payment looks a lot bigger than it used to on a car, or it's not nearly as satisfying as it once was. And so the marriage can be that way when people realize, oh, I'm an imperfect human being living with another imperfect human being, and we're trying to live what we thought was going to be a perfect life. Well, it's not. It's not. And so conflict usually comes up, and it can be pretty I don't know, shocking for people when it hits that wall, like at 2-3 years. I think that's a common, the end of the honeymoon phase, a couple years into marriage. And so Brandy and I had to deal with that. And the other thing too that's interesting is I am coming from a family that deals with conflict one way. She's coming from a family that deals with conflict in another way. Well, two different parents who deal with conflict in two different ways. And mine the same on my end. And I think we've had to work out, and people don't believe me now. We've been married 25 years. People don't believe me when I say we don't fight. Well, we don't fight. We have disagreements every now and then, but we don't fight because we've gotten over it. I know it sounds a little curt. It sounds, and not because we're great people or we've reached some perfection in our marriage. It's just that I think we got to the point where we didn't realize it's not worth it most of the time. Most of the things that we used to argue about or would have, we realize now, not even close to being worth it. What do you and Nicole? I'm wondering, was there just for people that are? I mean, my son is getting married soon, next month. So people aren't shocked when it comes when there is that period of time, because for us it wasn't too long after a year or two, and we realized we were dealing with things differently.
Yeah.
What do you see in your own marriage, and then maybe even in the counseling environment? Like, do you see that there's a certain time frame or a certain kind of person that deals with conflict differently? I mean, obviously everybody does, but
I think every couple, every situation, every time frame is different.
Yeah.
Based upon the people. I had when I was taking some counseling courses, I had a professor one time say, when two people get married, it's like two freight trains heading toward one another on the same track. No matter what your similarities are, right. You would think Nicole and I, just by looking at us and maybe knowing a little bit about our backgrounds.
Well, she's a redhead, first of all, for people who don't know. So that does make a difference.
They say it does. But you would think, hey, we're pretty similar background. You're going to handle things pretty similarly. So you probably wouldn't have that much conflict. And, I can remember just simple things. Nicole grew up in Tennessee. I grew up in Maryland. Maryland is not necessarily north, but it is a bit northern compared to Tennessee. Mm-hmm. And just the cultural differences between those states were a learning curve for us. And we might think, well, that's not a big deal, small deal. Well, it actually wasn't in the beginning. I mean, it took some learning to understand what she meant by her words and what I meant by my words. And you have to learn. And so what happens is you learn an understanding, I think. So it's not necessarily that you're trying to change the other person, but you have to learn to understand what they mean. So you and I can say the same word, but behind us is a different definition or a different feel of that word. So the more we talk, the more we decrease that gap of difference. So I think that happens. And then you also have like the actual conflict, something that causes a fight or an argument or whatever, and you learn either I'm not going to touch that subject anymore. We're going to learn to set it on the shelf and not deal with it, and that saves us conflict.
It's not worth it.
Or we're going to learn how to kind of walk through it, and sometimes you hit that cycle. You'll see couples who cycle. You kind of in that doom loop constantly. with regards to a particular conflict. Maybe it looks differently on the surface, but under the surface,
Yeah.
and that's the other piece that I would share. You know, I don't always think going back into your childhood and digging up experiences and all that is necessarily
Most counselors seem to want to do that.
And
yeah.
the reason for that, and in some ways where it's good, is recognize, because that's where our patterns and our habits are formed. So if you can
breaking bad patterns.
Yeah. If you can kind of go back and see, okay, this is why I act this way. This is why I respond this way to a particular situation, because there's a myriad of things we can talk about. We can get specific here in a minute, but looking at those foundational elements, sometimes you can begin to fix the foundation.
Yeah.
That helps conflict in the future.
And I think, so dealing with the me problem in marriage, and that's maybe where I'll bring it back when we deal with, children, helping our children resolve conflict, resolving conflict in marriage, dealing with the me problem. The thing that I kind of came to terms with was that I'm supposed to submit myself. We're supposed to submit ourselves one to another. We are one flesh. So when I hurt her, I hurt me, and vice versa. The whole 50-50 thing, I've said to many people over the years, and most people agree with me, it's 100-100. It's give everything to her, she'll give everything to me, and we'll both be great, or we'll at least start on the right foot. But the me problem is, and counselors will try to guide you through this, put yourself in their shoes. And the Bible would say that we're supposed to regard someone higher than ourselves. So I'm supposed to actually think about her feelings more than I'm supposed to think about mine. And that is a concept that's really, really hard.
Yeah.
It's just really tough to get there,
Well, and while she's your wife, she's also your sister.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. She's not my actual physical sister. People are going to think, whoa, Tobey, did not know that about you. So,
but, you do have to recognize, okay, I'm dealing with another believer in the Lord, and there's a specific way that I'm supposed to interact and respond to this person. But I agree with you. And again, what I see in myself, I would actually say when Nicole and I have conflict, maybe she won't listen to this, but most of it's with me. I'm the problem.
I would agree with, and I believe that entirely.
About me?
Yes.
No.
That it's with you.
No,
yeah. Our wives are saints.
Yeah. Yeah. I really think that what I've come over 25 years of marriage to understand is it's been a big learning curve for me to really learn how to die to self. Mm-hmm. And also, as a man, we ought to be and should be the protector of our wife, the protector of our family. But that's not just, in the sense of an intruder. I know you well enough to know, hopefully you know me well enough to know, if an intruder comes in our house, we're not sending our wives out.
Right.
But
I'm going to send an intruder out.
But when it comes to conflict, it's kind of like maybe we're not as apt to protect our wives from that. And so there's certain things like that I know are really important to my wife. And I'll give a quick, for instance, is my wife really takes the value of what our home, the order that our home is in personally.
Yeah.
So right now we have 7 kids, 6 still in the house. When she goes and she's, serving in a ministry at the church or doing something, she's away, but I'm home. If I don't take that time to actually think, okay, she's coming back, how can I help put the house in order?
Yeah.
It's not that I feel like I need to be the housekeeper, but how can I serve her well?
Yeah, that's a really good idea. That's a really good tip too of proactive avoidance of conflict.
Yep.
Is getting to the point where you're constantly serving each other, and that small infractions, small little irritations are overlooked because you've been serving each other well. That's a really good point. I think that's one of the things you learn as you get older, and as you've been married longer, how to serve each other well, what the other person needs to stay satisfied. And so if you serve each other well, then the dumb little things that I do, she overlooks, back to me. Counselors usually talk about the things that are most common in creating conflict in marriage, and it's money and parenting and in-laws and things like that.
The top three are communication, ability to talk, finances, and sex. Those are the top three that almost universally counselors will say these are what all conflict kind of stems from, relates to.
Interesting.
I've found that generally to be true.
So I know when I think about what has caused conflict over the years with us, it's probably the way, and this was a background thing. This was the way I was raised to kind of perceive money versus her. She's a saver, I'm a spender. And that was probably one of the things that over the years we've learned. It was the hardest thing to come to terms with, is that I'm more of a spender and she's more of a saver. And one thing that we have learned is that we've come together a lot more, and she is not afraid to spend money where it makes sense to spend money, where she used to just be a lot more tight-fisted. And I guess I've come the other direction too. I don't know, maybe a little bit. Yeah, I've come the other direction too. That I understand that we can't just spend everything we make. That'd just be silly. But one of the things I think as we've come through the years, I think I've learned to understand, and maybe this is something that comes with just time, understand how she feels. Try to put myself in her shoes, and that's easier said than done. That's one thing with conflict. If you can truly say, okay, why does this person feel the way they do? Why are they reacting the way they're reacting? Well, it's not because they don't love me, or they think I'm stupid. It's not because, and so I think that's one of the things that I would say men probably get their panties in a bunch. Probably is with, just thinking, well, she thinks I'm dumb and I don't know how to spend money, or she thinks I'm, it's feeling disrespected. I think, and I think that's one of the things that I've learned over the years is just, it has nothing to do with that. It's just when I spend more, and that's the other thing, visibility of our finances. If she doesn't have great visibility of our finances, sorry, I keep going on tangents here. People who keep separate checking accounts, I think that's kind of weird. Sorry if I called you weird. I apologize. I didn't mean to, but I think just not having visibility, that insecurity in the financial world, it's like, wait, you're spending a lot of money over there. Is that okay? Do we have that? It creates in her, has created in her in the past. And that's one of the things I had to learn, is it created this feeling of insecurity. She didn't know, she didn't like the idea of spending versus saving. And for me, when this was a long time ago, when she would question that, I felt like disrespected in a way that, don't you think
you don't trust me?
Yeah, you don't trust me. Exactly. You don't trust me. And I don't know if what you've seen in your own life or even in counseling situations with that, or maybe, so for us, that has been the one point of contention probably through the years.
Yeah.
That we've had to come to that's the one that kept coming back again and again.
That's why I think kind of it is helpful at times to sort of dig down. Like you said, you both came from different, you were raised maybe differently, or came up perceiving things differently in certain ways. So to understand where some of that comes from. And again, realizing the brokenness of our culture, which is, so we're all kind of raised, we're sinful, raised by sinful parents, and, whatever. And that doesn't, minimize the virtues of our parents and our place to honor them. But we're all raised with some quirks that if we understand, and if our spouse understands, one, it can help us grow from that. Not that we accept it as the reality that, this is just the way he is, we're just going to put up with it, or the way she is. But it actually presents an opportunity to grow, and you kind of alluded to that a little bit. That's what I have probably seen most in my life, is most of our conflict with with my wife particularly has been an opportunity for me to grow.
Yeah, agreed.
Sometimes I haven't been as introspective to understand, why am I responding this way? Like, why do I feel like you bruised my ego when you said that, or when you did that? And why do I care that my ego is bruised? What does that stem from? And so I think understanding where that comes from, and then allowing the Lord to heal us a little bit.
Do you find that that's the common, because I even alluded to that, that's the common kind of reaction, is men would typically say, you bruised my ego, and women might say, you hurt my feelings? I mean, is that, maybe that's too much of a generalization?
Yeah, I mean, the Bible, I think in Ephesians, the Bible couches it in love and respect,
right?
Which is a little different. Or maybe it's very similar. You know, our wives want to feel the love of their husband. Husbands obviously want the respect of their wives. You know, wives are naturally loving. Men naturally tend to show respect, but maybe not as naturally tend to show the love that a woman needs. So we have to work at it, which is why I think Paul indicates that. And I think the same with wives. Can naturally show love and affection. Respect can sometimes be a little more challenging. So that's why Paul says, hey, you're to respect your husbands too. So I think as men, you know, we want respect from people around us. And when we don't get that, that can be offensive.
Right.
You know, so.
Yeah. And I think, well, I'm just trying to think of what brought, when I say to people, and when I think about the fact that Brandy and I very rarely find ourselves in any real heated arguments. I mean, we don't have those. Why? And I think in all honesty, I think it was maybe it's a maturity thing. Maybe it's just getting older, realizing that, I think as I get older, I realize, and as in business, I think I feel the same way. As I get older, it's not that I feel like I have it more and more put together. I think I realize more and more how much I'm lacking. With every passing year, I realized that I just didn't know it before. I didn't know how much I was lacking. And so I think with every passing year, my realization with Brandy is, this is a woman who has decided to put up with me despite my flaws and despite my shortcomings, and not put up with me, love me, right? Accept me. And so I think just understanding our own failings, or at least our own shortcomings, is something that for me helps when you're dealing with somebody and you say, okay, they have a problem with me. Their problem is justified because I have problems. I mean, and so I think, okay, well then now I don't have a leg to stand on. You know, I can't act self-righteous when I don't have that leg to stand on. When I'm not righteous in that respect. You know, I was short with her, or I'm always short, but I was insensitive or whatever. If that makes any sense. I think that was one thing that as we've gotten older, we've just come to realize that, wow, this is a person who loves me despite my shortcomings. And
your relationship is going to be what you make of it.
Yeah.
You know, so you can choose to spend 50 years arguing on not like one another.
Yeah.
And that's often what happens. I mean, you know, this is
what have you seen?
Yeah, that's why you see families with kids, you know, husband and wife will be married for 20, 25 years and then get a divorce. Well, it's because they've never really, I mean, you know, it's been, they may have gotten a divorce at a particular point in time, but their relationship has not been at a high level of intimacy for a long time. And generally what happens, you get a few years into marriage, the husband will begin investing in work. Work is important because it is part of his identity. The wife will begin investing in family. And again, I'm speaking in a pretty general way. You know, she'll begin, if he's not meeting her emotional needs, she'll begin to get it out of the kids.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you are raising kids. Kids get 18, 19, 20 years old. They move out of the house. Now the wife has nobody, no place to get the emotional needs met. The husband's invested in work, and they've not worked at together, and either all those arguments come back that were never worked through, or you're so far apart that you're like, what are we doing?
Well, I was going to say that's the reality is they've been divorced for years.
Yeah, for sure.
It's just they finally put it on paper.
Yeah. And so I think, as you know, anybody who's married should know, you have to work at it. You've got to work at, I'll share a very simple illustration. I kind of alluded to it earlier, that Nicole, the house is important to her. She doesn't want people to come in. She sees it as a reflection upon her. I don't see it as a reflection upon her.
Right.
I think people walk in our house and it's kind of not, you got 6 kids in the house right now. So, people are going to understand.
Be a wreck.
But for her,
the fact that it's not a wreck is amazing.
But for her, it is, it's important. And so I've learned that, like, when she leaves and she comes home and, things aren't straight or things aren't in order, she sees that as a reflection on herself. So if I can help facilitate in that moment, hey, kids, let's get together and get things picked up. If I can jump in and wash the dishes, it's not that it's expected of me. Mm-hmm. I don't feel that from my wife at all, but I do feel like I can serve her in this way to help her avoid the stress of coming in and feeling like all of this weight is on her. So that only comes after a season of time of learning what she appreciates. And to me, I think that's, some men would take that and say, oh, that's her job. She needs to be doing it. I don't see it that way. It's actually a way for me to lead. I'm leading her. And the other thing I would say is I'm helping my sister not to sin. Yeah.
Right. Being angry with you.
Yeah.
All right, we'll leave that one there. It's funny I think, in all honesty, maybe it's the fact that we've been married 25 years. I think we dealt probably more in that little exchange with conflict avoidance than we did resolution, because I think that's probably the better approach. Is the best way to stay out of a fight, or the best way to resolve a fight is to stay out of a fight, is to
properly avoid it.
Yeah, exactly. So, what about one of the children, the little rascals, with, all their humanity wrapped up in them from day one, and they just want to, because if you think about raising children, then, okay, so it's hard enough when you get 2 adults together that have maybe lived by themselves or lived apart from each other, and then you put them in the same place and tell them, hey, love each other and serve each other, and that's tough enough. But when you take children whose first words, or one of the first words, are inevitably mine or me or no, like that's just kind of pent up in them, that little ball of flesh, and then you put them together, several of them. What are some things maybe to keep in mind with how we raise our children, speak into their lives, that help them understand their relationship with each other and how to resolve those conflicts? Mm-hmm. We've got enough experience. Again,
and it's not perfect experience. I want to be very upfront about that. We're still learning quite a bit.
But you know what? We talked about this the other day. Is we said in Bible study, we talked about our younger kids, because we were dealing with a young father, 4 girls, and he's just trying to understand, how we discipline, how we keep them reined in, and even punishment, right? And we said, as we're talking it through with him, we said with our older children, we tended to be pretty authoritarian and really kind of, and it's gotten easier because maybe we've gotten better at it with the younger kids.
Yeah, and I think the younger kids observe the older kids.
Right, that's a good point.
Again, my experience has been...
What gets you a whooping and what doesn't?
Yeah, and my older kids have... Like, I can remember, particularly my oldest too, at times saying, you all have got to get a handle on these younger kids, so there are...
So you're supposed to be helping us.
Yeah, they're helping to kind of corral them.
That's funny.
And so, like Isaiah, my youngest... in some ways...
You ever hear, that's not fair. You know what we used to get? We didn't.
But in some ways, Isaiah has gotten less disciplined.
Isaiah's your youngest.
Then, he's my youngest, than the others because he's got more parents.
Yeah.
He's got the older group. But the one thing I think is important, and it's just like in marriage, you got to work at it in the beginning. Don't spend years spinning your wheels around the same problems when you first get married. Get help to work through it so that the rest of your years are spent. If you can't manage it yourself, get help in order to manage it, to get over the hump.
It's a really good point. How miserable it is if you've been married 20 years and you're still dealing with the same conflict you had in your first year of marriage or second year. That's got to be frustrating.
And I think the same thing with kids is spending the time really early on with your first child and then your second child, or however many the Lord blesses you with, to build a bond, build relationship with them. And I think what I see in my relationship with Nicole and what I see in my relationship with kids, it's not always like what I'm doing, how I'm responding to conflict, it's time. My wife needs time with me. And sometimes I feel like I can't give her time because I've got this, that, and the other to do. And I think the same with kids. Time with a parent lends itself to relationship building that helps to minimize some of the conflict because they naturally kind of intuit who you are and what you want, and they want to please.
That's a really good point because I think one of the things that we've seen with our family, I was listening to a Tucker Carlson podcast, and he said this on several occasions that I've heard him say. He said a parent's dream, what every parent wants is for when their kids are grown, for them to love each other, the children, to love and appreciate spending time together and really just love each other. And I think that doesn't come naturally, just like peace in the home between a husband and wife doesn't come naturally. We have to work at it. And so I think one of the things that we, so again, this is proactive stuff, but I think the proactive is so much more, that's a more attractive option than say, okay, go put your boxing gloves on, you know, is spending time together, devices down, board games. We love board games. Well, it's funny because it depends on what time of day it is. The kids, it'll be after dinner on a weekend or something, and when they're over, because two of them are out of the house now, and now we have a future daughter-in-law that's part of the group too. But bringing out a board game at 8:00 in the evening, everybody else is like, "Yeah, let's do a board game," and I'm thinking it's 8:00.
I'm about ready to go to bed.
My brain is fried. I can't start to think about. Unless it's Sorry or something, you just have to pick up a card. That's easier. But,
not Catan.
Yeah, right. Not something where I have to think. So I think spending time together and maybe even dealing with each other on that level helps a lot when it comes to dealing with hurt feelings and stuff. And I have two boys and then a girl and then a younger boy. There's obviously different dynamics there, and different dynamics with different children, different ages, different birth orders. But I think the one thing, just like marriage, it's just making sure they're spending time together. And maybe it's not always even supervised time. Like my kids used to go outside when we lived in a place that was they grew up where there was a lot of outdoor spaces, and so letting them just kind of deal with it with each other, maybe get irritated with each other and then work it out.
Yeah.
How much do you let them work it out? Do you put boxing gloves on them? Do you?
I think you want them to work it out.
Yeah.
To me, we're trying to raise our kids to be able to manage their own conflict. Work it out. This is how you deal with it. I know so often.
Obviously with principles.
Yeah. But, like for instance, you may see like an older kid hit a younger kid, and the younger kid either start throwing a tantrum or crying or whatever. And one of the things that we would say to our younger kid is, hey, use your words. Use words.
Yeah.
Begin to communicate with us what's going on. Begin to communicate with your brother or with your sister what's happening. Use your words.
Oh, I thought you were going to say use your fists. They hit you. Go.
But That I think is a big key to conflict, because if you let the emotions go without reining them in some way, that's when, anger gets unbridled.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
And so I think teaching our kids, when you're speaking, your brain is engaged. And, if they're really angry, sometimes it's, hey, go journal. And I know sometimes people think, I don't have to deal with that or do that or whatever, but it is a really good skill to learn, to process the thoughts and makes your brain get engaged with what is happening around you so that you can think. And how many conflicts, stuff that's untrue is said, stuff that's really hurtful is said, things get broken, people get hit, things get busted, because people are not processing emotion. It just wells up, and you hear about it all the time on the news. That's what courts get restraining orders and all of these things, because it's emotion that is unchecked. Not that emotions are bad, but you have to use your brain to kind of pull that back. And I think that's a skill that's learned in childhood.
It's interesting. You were talking about using your words. I remember one of the tools that I don't know if it was a marriage enrichment class or something we took early on, Brandy and I did. And I remember learning this tool when it came to conflict, that was, when you say this is what I hear. I heard you say. Yeah. This is what I heard. And I remember one of the most profound, it's weird because I think it's Dr. Crescimano was his name. I just remembered that he was at Piedmont Community College when I was there back when I was young. And he taught a sociology class. I think his name was Crescimano. Sociology class. And he was talking about the web of life, and how all these things make us hear and experience things differently than the person next to us. All of the interconnected experiences you had as a child, relationships you've had, you hear things and experience things differently than that person. So one of the things we learned early in marriage was, hey, when you say that, this is what I'm hearing, this is what I'm feeling. No. And when we said that back to each other, you would say, oh, inevitably we would say, oh, that's not what I meant. I understand that, but that's what I thought. That's what I thought you meant. That's what I felt you meant. That's what I heard. Yeah. And so I think that's probably, going back to the children, using your words, I think is a good thing, because if you're just screaming and fighting, that's not gonna help anyone understand where you're coming from or what you're thinking.
Well, unfortunately, it creates a space between you and, say, your spouse or you and your kids, to where someone says, well, I'm never talking to him about that again. Right. Right. I'm not going to bring that up again.
As soon as I said that, they flew off the handle.
Which, brings down the level of intimacy that you can have, emotional intimacy, intellectual intimacy that you can have with someone, because you're bringing down the things that you can communicate about. I can't even talk to you about that. Right. Who wants that in their marriage or with their kids?
But that's a lot of people, I think. Yeah. And it is sad. And I would agree with Tucker in that, I do desire to have my kids grow up and enjoy spending time together. And they do. Yeah. They choose to spend time together, even when they don't have to anymore. But I think that's probably the key, is throughout their childhood, they didn't have opportunity to say, no, I don't want to spend time with, they just had to. We did things together, traveled together, went to church together. Always, when we did things as a family, it wasn't optional, Yeah.
I even tried to, it's hard. I mean, particularly with my boys, but I try to encourage them, hey, you guys need to hug one another, need to show love for one another. It's funny to watch. Yeah. But I think when you get older, I try to be intentional about showing affection to my kids, because I think it's important for them to know that I love them, not just with my words, but also with, giving them a hug or a kiss on the cheek or something along those lines. That's important. I try to encourage, my older son, he's pretty good about this, about staying in touch with the younger ones and staying in touch with family. He's naturally a talker, so.
Do you have a family text string?
With the ones who have devices.
Right, right. Yeah. And we do. Yeah, we do too. We have and that's kind of cool. Yeah. Is until I got my dumb phone, and that family text string, Brandy says, "Oh, your dad doesn't know. He didn't get that text or anything." And I do miss that, but that's one of the things that's kind of neat is staying in touch with each other because we have, the family kind of communicates with each other together.
Which goes back. I mean, I think it's good that you brought the your dumb phone up because how many other things compete for that time?
It's true.
So yeah, having a family text thread is nice, but how many other things compete for a time where you could, pick up the phone and call your son who lives outside the home, or one of your sons who lives outside the home, or do something else. Whereas if you're constantly dinging and binging.
Dinging. Yeah. What did I say today? I said to somebody because I like talking about my dumb phone. Because they were saying something, and I say, I'm sorry, I can't. It was my optometrist. I went and had an eye appointment today, and I said, can you imagine if we said to people, hey, I'm going to take a 3-year-old and put him in your pocket, and the way a 3-year-old acts, hey, pay attention to me, hey, over here. And that's the way your smartphone acts. It's like, hey, I got something important to say. And you're like, that's not important.
Yeah.
Why did you get my attention for that? It's not important. No. But we give it the same attention that we would give a 3-year-old. But anyway, I don't know where that came from. Dumb phone.
Well, taking your time from the things that matter.
Exactly.
To build the relationship. Time. I mean, the more we talk about it, the more I'm convinced, I just feel really convinced about it, is you can avoid a lot of issues with time.
Yep.
And you think of how much our culture around us tries to steal our time.
It's one of those cool commodities that everyone gets the same amount.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if I'm Elon Musk or I'm, me.
Yeah.
He does not get any more than I get.
Yeah.
He just probably spends it a lot better than I do. But it is one of those things that you think, there's no favoritism when it comes to time. Mm-hmm. We each get 24 hours a day, 168 hours a week. And how we spend it then is, whether we build up or tear down so I'm an employer and I also deal in customer service. You're a pastor, so you deal with staff and you deal with congregants. So I think as an employer, as someone who owns a business that deals with the public, I have to deal with conflict resolution over the years I've had less and less now than what I did with a disgruntled customer or disgruntled employees. Typically employees, either with a customer or with each other. And I think one of the things that a common theme that comes up with me again and again and again. Okay, so I'll talk about customers first of all. So and this is actually for me one technique that I've learned this is not profound. Everyone should know this, but very few people actually do it. And I try to practice it as much as I can when I am approached with, especially in customer service, is when someone raises the level of intensity in the conversation and volume, do the exact opposite and just bring it down, maybe even slow it down. And if they cut you off, stop talking and just patiently wait, and then just be very calm. And what I've seen over the years when I have dealt with customers that way is inevitably they will eventually bring it down, unless they're just off just completely unhinged, which I've had unhinged customers. I had someone one time call the police because they had, if you know anything about pawn, they lost something in pawn and called the police. And I'm like, it's a contract that the police came and said, why am I here? What, and I was like, I don't know why you're here. So that was one that I did not do well at keeping it, resolving it with my calm reaction. But I've tried to teach that to my employees as well. Listen, someone calls you names, curses at you. First of all, you tell them, listen, I'm not going to let you curse at me. I'm going to ask you to leave, but don't return the insults. Don't return the temperature. Don't return the...
That's biblical.
It is. And I think that's good too it's a good technique to learn in all conflict. But for me, with customers in particular, that's something I've learned over the years that's usually always effective with rational people.
Yeah.
Because even rational people get upset.
Yeah. So I've had to help and actually I like doing this, but mediate conflict where I'm not the center of it.
Oh, that's great. So you're like, I'm not the problem. You guys are the problem.
Right.
That's good.
But where I can kind of help bring
right.
two sides together, and you'll see like a side to pop up and a side to pop up, and sometimes just having somebody in the room that says, okay, when we start out, these are our ground rules. We all agreed with what the ground rules are. We're going to accept what the other person says. We're going to not raise our voice.
No low blows.
Yeah.
Only body punches.
If somebody gets up, you say, okay, we agreed. We're not going to.
Right.
I think you set some ground rules. And in some ways you can do that in marriage. You can do it with your kids. You can set some basic ground rules. Okay, I know you're upset, but this is how we argue in this house. I know you're angry, but we're not going
That's really good. The ground rules are
some basic ground rules, which is exactly what you're saying you're telling your employees to do. And I think the scripture gives us, examples of how to do that. We don't revile in return. We don't, someone says, hey, carry my coat 1 mile, you can carry it 2. You're kind of going the extra mile in order to bring down the temperature and to help get to a place of resolution. And I think it's important to recognize that resolution isn't always getting what you want. It's not always that it's going to go your way. And sometimes you have to be okay with not getting your way, but reconciling with the person. So, if you and I are at a disagreement and, the temperature...
You want to talk about it right now?
Say the temperature gets up, maybe we're never going to come to like, oh yeah, we've come to a conclusion that we both believe the same thing. We both are going to accept that. We may never get to that point, but we can get to a point of reconciliation to say, I see where you're coming from. I don't agree with you. You're my brother. We're going to keep walking this road together.
It's funny. We kind of had a conversation like that before we started the program. Not really, contentious or a real big disagreement, but different approaches to the, and we can talk it back and forth. And we know that there's a little bit of a nuanced view of certain things that we talk about, we have to deal with in church. But that's a really good point. Maybe the end game is not always perfect agreement. That is not. And so if that is always the end game, if you think that's the end game, and I think sometimes that's the reason why things get so heated in politics and whatever, because we think the end game is they have to agree with me. They have to agree with me. I have to make them agree with me.
Yeah.
Right? I have to keep on drilling and drilling until they finally just concede that, yes, you're brilliant. And that's right. And I think,
there are some people like that.
Yeah. I mean, I think, and we realize that's in a lot of conflict. That's not the ideal end game. The end game is, I respect what you're saying, and I really appreciate that you heard what I'm saying, and we disagree, and that's okay. We have different opinions on that.
I think the other beauty of that, particularly with Christians, is, okay, say we have a nuanced view on a particular issue. Someone else comes to you and says, hey, I don't like Robert's take on this, I don't whatever. You're actually able to say, let me help you understand how he sees this. And you may even say, it's not that I don't necessarily agree with everything he says, but I want you to understand where it comes from. Or I could do the same with you. It actually helps you to be an advocate for someone who you may not have full agreement with. Like, for instance, that happens all the time with my kids. I may not completely agree with how Nicole handles every situation with my kids, but I have a responsibility to intervene with my kids and to advocate for my wife. Let me help you understand where your mom is coming from.
That's a really good point.
Let me.
I was going to say, just to highlight with something you said. You said before we started the program, we were talking about. I had mentioned to the young men this past Sunday. I said, you guys, let me just ask you a question. You guys ever just have this compulsion to get into a fist fight? And they're like, to a person, they said, yeah, that's actually, it's one of the things, in my life, I'd like to get into a fist fight just to feel what it feels like sometimes. And I said to them, listen, that is unique to men, because I don't think any of the young ladies upstairs, if you said, hey, do you guys really just feel like you want to get into a fist fight sometime? They'd probably be like, what is wrong with you? You said sometimes you feel like when your kids disrespect or dismiss your wife, you feel like, like that just rises up in you that you want to defend you. And that's one of the things I would say with family conflict is always be in unity with your spouse, especially when it comes to parenting. Yeah. Always defend your spouse with your kids. Don't ever say, don't ever undermine your spouse with your children or with anybody.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
You can disagree in private.
Yeah, exactly.
But not publicly. Again, my kids have said this before, I know you're just going to agree with mom. And that's right. We're going to agree together. Yep. Or the reverse,
that's right.
is the
I have
case.
to sleep next to that woman.
Right.
It's cold if I don't agree with her.
You mentioned, I remember, so I grew up on a family farm. I was the youngest of the ones that lived on the farm, but my brother, my cousin who lived across the road, we always played together. And I can remember, we'd get in fights, we'd have fat lips, we'd just whatever all the time. And then it's like, an hour later you're out playing ball together again, or you're out and going in the woods and building a fort or whatever. But, I think it is something within boys at times that, just that aggression that you get it out, you're done, you move on.
I remember I was the one, I was friends with some girls and they would have these dumb arguments. And I was always like, that's just dumb. And I'd be the mediator. I'd be like, okay, they hurt each other's feelings and they said dumb stuff. And I never quite understood it until later in life. I guess in teenage years, I really understood, okay, we're different. We're wired differently.
Yeah.
I would say, so one of the last ones, my relationships with my employees. So I've said to people over the years when they say about business and the kind of the evolution of business, when I was a one-man shop, opened the doors for the first time, had to deal with customers one-on-one every day, all day. Then I got another person helping me, and eventually I was able to kind of step outside of the day-to-day customer transactions. And so what I saw my role as being was my employees take care of my customers, I take care of my employees. But one of the things I've seen over the years is not just employees and how they maybe would have some conflict with each other, but is conflict with me, right? My employees feeling like that there was something I said, did, the way I acted, or the way things that I wasn't doing that they felt like I needed to address. One of the things I've learned to do over the years is, first of all, listen to them. I wasn't always good at that, and I still sometimes a little bit self-serving, and not always have my ears open. But the one thing I say to them, and it's funny because Tim Waltz got a really bad rap for saying I'm a knucklehead sometimes in his debate with Vance. But I say to them, listen, I'm working on that, but I'm sorry. First of all, why does it just now that I'm coming up with those two words? I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That is something. You're right. You're right. I was wrong. Those words have come out of my mouth more times than I'd like to admit. You're right. I understand what you're saying now. I see. And I've had to do this with not only with my wife or my kids, but my employees. You're right. That was insensitive. What I said was insensitive. I didn't realize it at the time. I'm trying to work on that. I'm sorry. I apologize. Sometimes I just don't measure up. And so I'm working on that. You let me know if there's times when you see things. I'm glad to hear, what you have to say. What do you see in, being a pastor, of congregants, of, other staff members? Are there certain types of misunderstandings or certain techniques or things you just learned over the years?
Again, church conflict and the reason why churches get a bad rap, and we talked about this a little bit as well earlier, is sometimes it can seem like the conflict is rooted in theology, and it's like, I can't give on this because it's a theological principle.
Interesting.
And I think we have to be careful of that. There are some things that, I've tried to frame it in the past. There's some things that we need to take a bullet for. There's some things that we don't need to take a bullet for.
Yep.
And let's make primary the things that we're willing to take a bullet for and should take a bullet for. And the other things, let's hold loosely and charitably. And sometimes I think in a church, we don't understand which are which. And we feel so strongly about
really
certain
good point.
things.
Yeah.
And we root them in theology. And if our brother or sister doesn't accept it the way that we accept it, we begin to hold them at arm's length or conflict, have conflict with them. And I think it's important with regards to church conflict to really realize, is this particular issue worth me taking a bullet for?
The expression, is this a hill you're willing to die on?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Color the carpet, color the chairs.
Right.
Even some theological issues that we would discuss, hymns or worship songs. Is that
right?
Does it require us to break fellowship over these things? Again, there's preferences, and that's okay. You've got preferences. I've got preferences. That's great. And it depends on our mission, but are those things that are worth us breaking fellowship over? And I think, you even see with Paul, and, Paul is so frustrated with John Mark that we see it spill out in Scripture. We see Paul's frustration, and Barnabas, once again, is kind of the one who comes in and sort of helps to keep the peace. And there are peacemakers, and the Bible says, blessed are those, blessed are the peacemakers. But later on in life, we see Paul actually says, hey, I want him to come to me. I want him to be with me. He's needful to me. So Paul even realizes maybe what we were in conflict about isn't as important. Now that I'm at the end of my life, I see things differently. And, you mentioning your interaction with your employees sometimes where you're having to say, hey, I'm sorry. I know my tendency at times is, particularly with my wife and even in church sometimes, is I can feel like I'm the one that's always apologizing. Shouldn't you apologize, son? And sometimes we get like that. Mm-hmm. And that's not the right approach. And sometimes we apologize sarcastically. Well, I'm sorry. I don't think that's a biblical way either. Sometimes I've offended you, and I don't need to say, I'm sorry to you.
Yeah.
I need to say, will you forgive me?
Yeah, that's a really good point. One of the things that recently we were dealing with, the Lord's Prayer, you've been dealing with the Lord's Prayer in some of your sermons. And the one thing that I was reminded of is the biblical truth that if I don't forgive, I can't be forgiven.
Yeah.
I will not be forgiven if I can't be forgiving.
Yeah.
And I think that's and so that's the reason why I think you're right. Not just saying I'm sorry, but please forgive me.
I mean, I'm sorry I knocked your camera over. That was an accident. But if I've brought offense to you, that's something I need to ask forgiveness for. Mm-hmm. And the thing, why that is so good, I think, biblically, is that it requires me to humble myself and say, I've done something to offend you. I recognize that I've offended you. It was sinful for me to offend you. Will you forgive me for the offense?
Yeah.
It also puts an onus on you,
right,
to say,
now it's in your court.
Yes, I forgive you. And the goal then is restoring the relationship. And that is one of the things that I think, particularly in marriage, I've shared this with some couples. I said, so some of you are better than the Lord at raising up dead things.
That's a really good,
because they go back and they dig up.
Oh my goodness! Put it to death.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, just let it stay in the grave.
That's a really good place to wrap it up. Actually, yeah, put it to death. Let it stay in the grave. No, I like that. So
thank you.
Yeah, well, we'll figure out what next time brings. But thanks.